I'm Emily Gant, and welcome to the Not My Job Pod, where today I am actually not talking to anybody. This is a self episode, but as we jump into episode 5, I kind of want to speak about why I'm doing this. On one hand, I feel like there's a lot of cringe associated with starting some sort of new project, and that was kind of the point. Was I wanted to try something different. So in 2025, I really kind of felt like I was starting to settle into Berlin and that I was going to stay here and live here for a long time. And this was just kind of going to be my place. And I set some goals. One was a rather aggressive German goal, which was achieving the B2 level by the end of the year, which I am on track to do. The other was getting permanent residency, which I have now achieved and I'm very excited about. I also set a goal for myself to continue. This is something I've been doing since the pandemic, at least 3 workouts a week. So far, that's going well. And then the last one, which was the hardest one, because I kind of started it in February and then put a pause on it because I just didn't know if I even wanted to release it or if it was the right choice of a creative hobby, was this podcast. So with the encouragement of some friends, I was like, okay, here we go. Let's give it a try. I decided that I was going to do this for 10 weeks because it felt like a manageable amount of time to kind of understand if this was fun. The goal here has never been to get a bunch of followers. The goal here was just to see if this is a medium that I enjoy, because I think everyone should have some sort of creative hobby. And at the time when I was coming up with my goals for 2025, didn't have one. So kind of creating these questions list and then just talking and releasing is kind of just been a learning experience for me, trying something that I don't normally do. So who knows, after episode 10, I might decide that I'm done and I want to move on to painting or some other creative hobby. But for now, it's podcasting. I think that's kind of the important bit here, is that I just do what I can and see how it goes and then check in with myself to see how I feel. But I do want to talk today in this solo episode because a lot of people lately, given what's going on with US politics, have kind of talked to me about, like, sometimes they're joking, but sometimes they're not joking about, hey, I would like to move out of the US. What do I need to do and how do I get there? And that's a hard question to answer because can pretty much anyone I know move out of the US? Absolutely. Is it harder than you might expect? Yes, absolutely. Mostly because of visas, and Americans can't just naturally qualify for one. But a lot of people are attracted to Germany because there is something called the skilled workers visa. So a lot of my friends who do work in tech, tech is considered a field where they need workers here in Germany. So a lot of people kind of see that and they think, oh, it'll just be easy. I could move there. And so I don't want this to dissuade anyone from that, but I do want to kind of talk about the experience of moving here and maybe help some people figure out if it's right for them or if they want to look into other countries. So for some context, I have lived in many countries. I've lived in China, Indonesia, Ecuador, Chile, and Tonga, as well as 2 years of digital nomad style living where I was traveling in Spain, Argentina, Portugal. So I've been to a number of other countries just as a traveler as well. So I think due to the many years of experience moving around and having my entire life packed in 2 suitcases, it was a lot easier for me to make this move to Germany. I had moved to Chicago, thinking that I was like, okay, I'm starting to get older. I want to get more settled down in my career. So I thought to myself, I need to stick in one place. And I was constantly traveling out. So I don't think you can build a life somewhere if you're constantly like feeling this urge to leave. And that's kind of where I was at when I was in Chicago, despite being incredibly grateful for the community that I did make there and all the friends that I have there and still have there, some of which are listening to this podcast now. But I do think it's hard. Like if you take I think a lot of Americans have a lot of stuff. So I think if you look around at all the stuff that you have and really think to yourself, like, could I consolidate this into a move? I think a lot of people stop there because you really can't bring all your stuff with you. And I think a lot of us just in general have too much stuff. For the first time in my life, I actually have like furniture and things, and that's strange. That is strange for me, but I'm starting to kind of settle in and realize I don't actually have to pack it up in 2 years. I just live here now. So I am very accustomed to moving to different apartments, packing up my life, getting it in 2 suitcases, handling visas, handling bureaucracy. If ever, as an American, you've been to the DMV and thought to yourself, this is the seventh circle of hell, that's kind of what you're up against as an immigrant coming to a new country and then trying to sort out your visa and settle in. And I think that's just a really important note because it's not easy. And I think a quote that my dad always used to say to me was like, the best things in life are easy, or something to that extent. I don't think it means that you don't have to work for them, but you shouldn't be like struggling uphill in the rain both ways to make something happen. Moving here to Germany specifically, that was something that was not easy, but it was quite smooth sailing. Like I got very lucky. I wasn't you hear about a lot of immigrants moving to Germany and they struggle. They're moving like 10, because we'll get into that in a second. Getting an apartment is a nightmare and a half. Finding a job, finding community. A lot of people have loneliness issues when they move to Germany, and that's very real. And that's not something I can speak to because, in that sense, moving here was incredibly easy. In that, I found community very fast. I got very lucky with finding work experiences that could sponsor visa, and also bureaucracy was already a very normal part of my life. For perspective, applying for a visa in China is hard, and then Germany comes around and everyone's like, yeah, the bureaucracy is a nightmare here. I've already done this in a language I can't even read. So, like, at least in Germany, I can look down at the paperwork. And now I speak a bit more German, but I could look at the paperwork and kind of like match up letters. Whereas in China, it was like one step up on hard mode. So I do think that there's a lot to consider beyond just kind of like cultural stuff. It's like there's a lot of logistical stuff and a lot of challenges that people don't consider. So in Germany, I came here on something called a blue card, which is a 5-year visa for skilled workers. I actually found the job when I was in the US and I decided to move here. And a friend of mine said, who already lived here, she said, it's going to be easier for you to find a job than it is for you to find an apartment. And she was very right. If you look up Germany housing crisis, you'll see it's crazy. Listings for apartments that are just like absolutely extortionately priced and relative to the salaries here will just go in 2 seconds because there's just a shortage. There's more people who want to live here than there are places to live. That results in a lot of immigrants moving here, and they switch apartments every month because they can only get short-term rentals. And then it's sort of a chicken and the egg situation where you're trying to show that you have a work history and that you have money and that you can pay your rent, and that you have a background check, but like you can't get those things unless you've been in Germany for a certain amount of time. And then it's also difficult because in order to get a lot of your bureaucracy done, you need to be able to register somewhere, and a lot of those short-term rentals won't allow you to get the Anmeldung, which is the housing registration. And that's kind of like the baseline piece of paperwork you need in order to do everything here. It was a paperwork nightmare, but again, for me, not out of the ordinary, I suppose, but definitely something to consider. I've heard from people who have come here as a freelancer that that's even more difficult because you have to prove that you're associated with a certain number of clients, and it's just hard. And then also, when you're on a blue card or any sort of work visa here in Germany, that is attached. So it's a regular work permit here is attached to your employer. So if you were to get fired or leave your job, you need to find another employer to sponsor that work visa. The blue card is a little bit different in that it's tied to your job title. So if you are a certain tech, let's just say tech manager, that's not a job title, but let's say tech manager at a certain company. If you were to quit, you have 3 months to find a new job with that same title or some similar sort of title. And then it also needs to hit a certain salary requirements to stay on the blue card. So that's also stressful because in Germany, usually jobs will have a 6-month probation period where either you or your employer can just call it quits at any time. And they don't have to have a reason to let you go. And you don't have to have a reason either. You can just leave. Ironically, the probation period in Germany is quite similar to the working conditions all the time in the US, where your employer can kind of just let you go for whatever reason. So that part doesn't stress Americans out. But something to consider is that a lot of companies are a little bit exploitative in Germany with that probation period, especially with immigrants. So because those companies know, and I'm thinking of a couple of different companies, especially in tech in Berlin, they quite proudly state that they hire so many immigrants, but at the same time, a lot of them kind of ask yourself how long those people stay. So if a company, there's a number of really large tech companies in Germany who often bring in labor to Berlin, they work them for 6 months and then they fire them on the end of their probation period before all of their sort of German labor law rights kick in. And then that's awful because then you have 3 months to find something else and you're still have to go through a whole new probation period at that new job. And then a lot of companies also, they know that employees are just there so that they can eventually get a better residency permit, a permanent residency, Niederlassungserlaubnis. And so the reason a lot of those companies will kind of like pay under market value for your skills is because they know that you're going to stick with them for on the blue card, you can apply for permanent residency after 21 months, or you can apply if you have B1 German. And then I think it's 27 months. I might be wrong on that. I applied after 21 months that you can apply for permanent residency without German skills. So you'll start to see like a steep drop off at some of these very large tech companies where people leave for another job or to just take a career break after 2 years because they've achieved the visa that they came there for. And it's kind of an unspoken thing. I think a lot of people don't like to talk about, but these companies know what you're after um, as an immigrant. And there are, it's not true in every case, it's not true of every company. And I don't think any company is going into this thinking, hey, I'm going to exploit people. But it is something that you should be aware of is that there's that 6 month probation period where they can fire you. And then there's kind of less than ideal working situations for immigrants in situations where it's harder for you to find a job because you don't speak German. And so what you have to tolerate is going to be a bit higher than an average German worker working in tech. So if a tech company proudly states that they hire lots of immigrants because they can't find people in Germany, I would definitely just take that with a grain of salt. That's my opinion based on what I've seen. So the tech scene in Germany is definitely not as thriving as it used to be. I think it's quite difficult to start up a business here with all of the taxes. And we'll kind of get into money drivers later in this episode, but that's definitely something to consider. So now I am currently on a permanent residency visa. So that means I just live here. The only regulation is that I have to spend at least 6 months out of the year in Germany to maintain that permanent residency, but it's not tied to my job. So if I were to decide, I want to pursue a passion or I want to take a break and go work in a bookshop, I can now do that. I'm not tied to any sort of like technical employer as I was when I came here. I still work in tech, but it's nice to know that I kind of have that free will decision making. Now I'm in a job that I really am excited about and I'm there because I want to be there, not necessarily because of visa considerations. I'm not like counting down the days to get out, which I think a lot of immigrants are who are on blue cards or regular work permits are just counting down the days to get out. Yeah, you just have to weigh if that's something that's worth it to you. And to me, that was something that was very, very worth it. Something that stalls a lot of immigrants from, first off, too, I'd like to say immigrants versus expats. A lot of people here in Germany call themselves expats. I prefer the term immigrant. An expat is someone who goes to another country. They're sent by their company for a short, predetermined space of time. If you're moving here and trying to like make your life in another country, you are an immigrant. Congratulations. It annoys me when people don't use that word because that's what we are. I am an immigrant. And so I do have, especially looking at my home country and a lot of people who want to go to the United States, I'm very pro-immigration. One hot take that I have though is that you should learn the language of the country that you are immigrating to. That being said, in the United States, that's a little bit different because there is no official language in the United States. However, in Germany, German is the official language. And I do think if you're going to immigrate here, take advantage as you should of the systems and policies that Germany has. You should learn the language as a bare minimum. I do have friends who have lived here for 5-10 years and they don't speak any German and they have a very different experience. It's not necessarily a bad experience. Some of them are very happy here, but I do think there's like a whole side of the city that they don't get to see because they've never really tried to engage in the language that way. You'll find more opportunities opening up to you when you speak German more. I think a lot of people talk about local Germans as being stereotypically cold, and that's not my experience at all. My experience in Germany is that whenever I've tried to speak with someone, they're incredibly kind. I recognize my privilege there. I have blonde hair, white skin, so it's very, I'm not being discriminated against maybe in ways that people of color could be discriminated against. So I don't want to negate that. I can only speak from my own experience, but in my experience, when I have made the effort to talk to people in German, everyone's been incredibly kind and very, very helpful. I think Germans maybe not be initially very, very warm. However, once you've kind of, you keep sticking around, you keep showing up and you keep being consistent, and then all of a sudden you're a forever friend. I think that if I were to generalize the culture here, it's it's a lot of work to become friends. But, then those friendships are, I think, going to be more long term. And we'll see. Maybe in a few years, I'll say to myself, "Oh yeah, I don't see those people at all anymore." But I don't think that that's the case. I feel like the friends that I am making here are people that are going to be in my life for a very long time, and that's very different from sort of the digital nomad or lifestyle that I had when I was in my 20s and earlier 30s. Now I'm in my mid 30s, so I do think learning the language is very important. I also think, especially Americans who never had to learn another language, they overestimate their abilities and underestimate how much time it's going to take to learn a language. You can look up how long it'll take to learn, and it's just buckle up. It's a long time. So this year I'm trying to get to B2, which is like this intermediate hellscape where I can actually really start to converse with people and make myself heard. But it's still not fluent. And I think in my head, I was thinking to myself, okay, if I'm C1, then I'll be fluent. And officially on paper, yes. But when I talk to friends of mine who are at C1, they're like, I'm just starting. I'm just starting. So it'll be a long road, but that's something to consider as well. Let's say you've spent an entire day at your job that, is maybe kind of less money than you'd be making in the United States. And then you got to go to German class and then fit in your social activities. So like, again, we're going to talk about the benefits as well to being here. And for me, those really outweigh the cons, but I do think it's important to say, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So moving here, regarding the financial hit of moving here, personally, I didn't really want to struggle. So I spent about 15,000 US dollars on my move here. And honestly, I don't even think that was that much. It wasn't that extravagant, but the cost of apartment deposits, moving around the first month until I got paid, some furniture, that was all, it added up quite quickly. And then the biggest financial hit that other people don't really, I've never heard anybody talk about this, but specifically for Americans, if you're moving to Europe, you are still a tax resident of both the United States and of the European Union, in my case, Germany. So this makes it incredibly difficult to invest. So I can't invest in European markets from a European brokerage account. I can only invest in the US. And then because I'm still taxed in both places, I'm still trying to figure this out. This is the big unknown for me right now. If I were to pull money out of my US accounts in the future, then I get taxed in two countries on that money. So right now I'm trying to weigh the costs and benefits of, maybe in a few years, I need to switch my citizenship once I'm eligible to apply for a German passport. I apply. And then I have to decide from there, okay, what do I want to do about my investments in the US? Do I want to move them all over to Europe and like just get taxed now? It's just, I don't know. I don't know what's the best way. So that's probably actually going to be one of my 2026 goals, is figuring out what the heck to do with my finances, because probably the biggest cut to me financially was the fact that I put a lot of my investing on hold because I don't know which tax country I want to be a part of. Right now, all my investments are in the United States and I can't invest in Europe. Well, I can invest in Europe, but I can't invest from Europe. And that's annoying. That's very annoying. And definitely stalling kind of the wealth that I could be building over time with investments. So right now, those are just sitting until I figured out until I felt safe. And now I do feel safe because I have permanent residency. So I need to figure that out. But the paperwork and the life admin never ends in that way. So that's something that, yeah, right now I don't even know how to deal with or what I'm meant to do with that. So that's a problem for later, sooner rather than later. But also, there's the stress of, if something were to happen to a family member or a really close friend while I'm over here, I don't know what that's gonna look like in the future. I just had a friend whose father passed away and she was back and forth to her home country a lot. And it was a very stressful time. And it's a little bit morbid to think about that, but I think a lot of us who have moved away do have to think about that. And that's kind of part of life as well. That being said, kind of the biggest factor for me here as to why I do think all of this was truly, truly worth it is the security that I feel now. So it was kind of again, the good things in life are easy. I got very lucky in that I found an apartment very quickly. I already had a job, very quickly found friends, community, and I already knew a few people here when I came. I immediately got into German classes. Like I had a lot of friends who were willing to help me with like prep for tests that I had to take to get my residency card. So very, very lucky there. But to me, what's worth it is like that now I have this permanent residency card and I do feel safe here. So if I were to lose my job, my situation in Europe is very, very different. So not even in the case of a lost job, but back when I was still on my blue card and I switched jobs, I went from one to the other. And there was a 1 month period where I just kind of wanted a work break. And I called up my insurance company to say, hey, and at this time I wasn't eligible for German benefits because I had only been working in the country for a short time. I said, hey, I'm switching jobs. I'm not eligible for any benefits right now. I have to pay it myself, the insurance cost. And the lady on the phone was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is going to be so expensive. And as an American, I'm starting to sweat. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is going to be incredibly, incredibly expensive. And then I'm thinking like 2,000, 3,000 euros or something crazy for 1 month. And then she's like, it's 200 euros. And I just started laughing. I was like, 200 euros for me to pay for my insurance myself. Okay, cool, cool. So yeah, I paid my 200 euros and enjoyed my month between jobs. But usually, in Germany, you wouldn't have to pay, yourself for that kind of situation. Usually when you lose your job or you quit your job, you go on something called, well, you contact like the Arbeitsamt, which is like the work, and then you go on something called Arbeitslosengeld, which is like job loss money, is what that kind of translates to. And so it's not in the United States, I think benefits are very scary to some people, and it kind of feels like, I don't know how to describe it really. I think in the United States, if you're on benefits, it's kind of still, there's a stigma attached to being on benefits, even though personally, I think anyone who needs them should use them. That's what they're there for. Yeah, I don't need to get into that. But yeah, I'm very pro benefits, and I do want my taxpayer dollars going to helping families or helping people who have, come on hard times. I don't think everyone gets lucky all the time. Like life sometimes hits you, and it's nice to have a fallback. That's kind of the product of the society that we live in. But in Germany, you really see that happen. So if you lose your job in Germany, you do get 60% of your salary paid to you by the government. And in that time, you are employed by the government as a arbeitslos or without job person. And that's amazing. In that time, you can also apply for government sponsored, like, so you're showing that you're applying for jobs in that time, but you can also apply for government sponsored assistance. So to elevate your career. So if you, for example, you work in tech on the product side and you really want to learn how to code, you can spend, up to a year learning how to do that, like upskilling, changing kind of what you want to do, changing your qualifications, changing your skill set. And that's something that, yeah, I couldn't imagine in the US. Here, if you lose your job, it's totally okay because you're gonna have this, you're gonna have money to not live lavishly, but like live, at a fairly normal standard, and then pay all your bills. And then in that time, you can also upskill and actually make yourself better. So I really appreciate that system. I haven't used it yet, but I'm sure a day will come where I do. And there's no stigma against it here. It would be bizarre, I think, to a German if you didn't take advantage of that, if you found yourself without a job. So I will say, if you are a very money driven person, Europe is probably not for you. But kind of with the big gains you can get in salary and financially in the US comes greater risk. In the United States, you're one health emergency away from financial ruin. We're talking, one accident can end up costing you millions of dollars, and you didn't expect to, get whatever the accident was or whatever like health shock is happening to you. Nobody expects that. Nobody wants it. Nobody prepares for that. And in the US, you can't prepare for that because you have some emergency surgery and then you owe like tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then, yeah, of course, you can apply for like medical bankruptcy, but like just the fact that that's a conversation that we're having is wild to me. So here I have the security of knowing that if I lose my job, I still have a cushion based on the taxes that I've paid. I still have a cushion to sort of find something else to upskill, to like take a breath and figure it out and come up with a new plan. Whereas in the United States, it's like you need to be putting aside a certain amount. If an accident happens, like honestly, you're just kind of you're screwed. And for some people, the risk is worth it in that they want to make a larger paycheck, and kind of I think if you're very like career and hustle driven, um, then that's great for you, I suppose. And that's not to say I'm not driven. For me, career is actually something that's very, very important. I always want to do better. I want to be surrounded, but for me, the driver is not necessarily money. It's being surrounded by people who are really passionate about what they do and are really knowledgeable about what they do so that I can learn from them over time. And so to me, that's incredibly valuable compared to sort of this idea that I need to work 70 hours a week and weekends and that sort of things. I currently work for actually a company based in the US, but it's just really, right now, it's been aligned with my values. But I think for me, the thing is that if in the future this job was not aligned with my values, I don't have to like find another job or worry about my financial situation. I can just quit. And that to me is like very empowering just as a person. And there's a lot of things that this German social system provides, and a lot of that is security. So your salary here is going to be, half of what it would be in the United States, and taxes are going to be a lot higher. So like your take home is like, 40%, if we're talking about salaried employees here, is like 40% of what it would be elsewhere. But that being said, like I, I I don't have kids either, but if you have kids, I have friends in the United States who are paying thousands of dollars a month to put their kids in childcare, and that's free here. So there's actual support for um, new mothers and new families. So, if you are a new mother, it's fascinating to me as well. You have a baby. There's actually someone who comes, they're paid for by your insurance. They come to your house to like check up on you multiple times after the baby is born. And so, yeah, I pay a lot of taxes. And personally, I don't plan to ever have children. Am I still happy that my tax paying dollars go to community services, like somebody showing up for a new mother to make sure that she's not depressed and that, everything's working in the order that it should be, and that everything's fine with her new baby? Like, yeah, that's support for a greater community. And that's something that personally I'm just very aligned with. I think in the United States, there's a lot of talk of family values, but then no actual services for women to support their children or give birth is very expensive. I had a friend in the United States say that had her second baby she decided to not use pain medication because it was too expensive. So on her first baby, she got the bill and she was looking at the things and she was like, what can I knock off? And that's just wild to me. Nobody should have to make those kinds of decisions when, growing a family or being a member of society. I think should entitle you to a good life. And so no, you're not going to make the money that you would make in the US. But also if things were to go very, very wrong and you just hit a strike of bad luck, your standard of life is going to stay very, very similar in Germany. I will just say, as an immigrant, it takes a couple years to get to that point where you are a part of the social systems that act as that safety net. So yeah, people complain. People complain about healthcare here. I've never waited for an appointment. Even the horror stories that I hear about healthcare here, it kind of comes down to, do you speak German? Which again, we talked about that before. It's like if you're going to move to a country where that's the language, then you can't be expecting everyone to accommodate you. So to me, that's not Germany's fault. I'm sure there are other kind of horror stories, but my experience getting care has always been very, very high quality, very fast. I've always felt heard by the doctors that I've gone to. And if I haven't liked the doctor, then I just go to a different one. And that's also quite nice. I did that last year. I went to one gynecologist, I didn't like them, and then I switched to another one, and no problem. So I think it is, for being kind of a hybrid public-private system, and I don't need to go into the whole details of the German healthcare system, but for being a private public system, mostly public, kind of sponsored by your employer. It's a little bit hybridy. It's not free. You pay for it from your salary, from your taxes, from, yeah, definitely not free, definitely very expensive, but just the system and how it's required of everybody. Like nobody's going to be without healthcare. And that to me is very valuable. So yeah, high taxes balanced out with kind of the social safety net. And to me, I think it's interesting. A lot of my friends and I are considered high earners in Germany, which is still much lower than it was. Even like what I make now is significantly lower than um, sort of my starting out salaries in the United States. And granted, I've worked in other countries too, so I am accustomed to living within the means of like the local uh, economy. For me, it wasn't as stressful moving here with like a financial cut because it was still, it came down to perspective. But I do think if you've been working in the US for like 15 years and then you come here, I can imagine that that would be very, very shocking that your actual salary is going down. But my standard of living is excellent. I go out to restaurants a couple times a week. I still get to go to bars. I go to parties. I travel. I do things. And to me, that's worth more than money in an investment account. Granted, I still need to figure that out because I do think building wealth is something especially women should be doing more of. But yeah, I would say the financial is the biggest kind of barrier for a lot of people. It's a tough pill to swallow. But that being said, yeah, I love it here. I love in Berlin that you have little senses of community, and each neighborhood is very different. Berlin is quite similar to when I lived in Chicago that way, that every neighborhood has like its own unique personality. And once you make an effort to start saying hello to people, the lady at the grocery store says hi to me, and the guy who runs the dry cleaning place says hi to me when I walk by. The coffee shop knows me, so it just still really feels like a community. And for me, community was something that I really valued and was looking for in a move, as well as that social safety net and being able to provide for a society being able to provide for itself in some way. So I'm not saying that there aren't issues in Germany. There are absolutely issues in Germany. There are issues everywhere. But kind of when I look at the pros and cons, I do personally find that the system is functioning quite well. There are always improvements that could be made, but just the fact that I can go sign up for community college and go to take German classes, and it's relatively inexpensive because it's subsidized by the government. Like that's amazing that I live in a society where there's value on free museum days and the citizens of that society like being cultured and knowledgeable and exploring different viewpoints. And yeah, to me that's incredibly valuable and hard to put a price tag on. So even though there was a financial hit, definitely a balance. That is kind of thoughts on being an immigrant, specific to an American moving to Germany who also just had a very kind of streamlined and easy experience, as easy as it could have been. Uh, I know that's not the case for everyone, and everyone kind of has their different struggles. And I would like to reiterate that a lot of what stresses people out when they move here would be kind of a culture shock. And for me, that part, that was a non-issue. So I definitely, I feel very lucky. Feel very lucky to be here. Feel very lucky to be part of the community, and definitely planning on applying for a passport in a few years, and to be determined on if I renounce my U.S. citizenship. I think for now it's nice. It's nice having a passport where my family actually lives. Just need to figure out what that does to my tax situation. But that's 2026's problem. I am just now accomplishing my 2025 goals. So that's good enough for me at the moment. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.